we're obviously here all today to celebrate World Oceans Day. Here at Ocean Culture Live, we've been doing this for a few years now, and we're always really excited about World Oceans Day. Like Joe Royale said on the last chat, it's a little bit like New Year's Eve and kind of New Year's for the oceans. It's quite nice to be able to all come together, collaborate and talk about what's relevant right now and the work that needs to be done moving forward. Often we like to celebrate the day by sharing stories of the crucial work that our ocean guardians are up to in the communities that we're involved in, what they're up to around the world. And we do that obviously through imagery and film and talks. It's something we look forward to every year, like I said. And it's something where we find the conversations that we have often do turn into actionable steps and inspire the people to move forward with what we're talking about. Whilst our physical celebrations were postponed or cancelled for obvious reasons this year, we simply couldn't let the day go unrecognised, which is why we've organised a host of talks today. And I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to you guys for joining in. Today on this webinar, we're going to speak a little bit about why a healthy sea is vital to a healthy economy and how we can work together for a sustainable blue economy whilst ensuring standards are still met. And to help us understand this, we've got an incredible panel of ocean guardians who I will let introduce themselves and their organisations. So maybe we can start with yourself, Enric.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Enric Sala. I am Explorer in Residence at National Geographic.
Fantastic. And Andrew, you move on to yourself.
Hi, I'm Andrew Mitchell. I'm speaking to you from Jersey in the Channel Islands, and I'm the founder of a new company here called Equilibrium Futures, that I spent a lot of my life in conservation around the world, and some of it in oceans.
And Martine?
And my name is Martine Manuel. I'm the general manager at a resort in the Maldives called Six Senses Lamo. And we have a team, Maldives Underwater Initiative, a team of 10 marine biologists. We have an association with 3 NGOs. And we try and do what we can to be sustainable and contribute to ocean conservation.
Brilliant, fantastic. I thought it might be nice to kind of kickstart and talk a little bit about how you got into working, say for instance, Enric with Nat Geo, or maybe a little bit more about your journey and how you kind of ended up working on what you're working on today, just because I think a lot of people can resonate with that journey.
Yes, I used to be a professor at the University of California at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And I was studying the impacts of humans in the ocean, the impacts of fishing, climate change. And one day I realized that all I was doing was writing the obituary of the ocean. I felt like the doctor who's telling the patient how she's going to die with excruciating detail, but not offering a cure. And that was quite a frustrating and sad realization. So I decided to quit academia and dedicate all of my time to ocean conservation. I went to National Geographic and proposed something crazy, something called Pristine Seas, a project to go to the wildest places in the ocean, the most remote, mostly uninhabited, but still unprotected, and conduct scientific research, economic analysis, produce media to inspire the leaders of the countries that own these places to protect them in very large marine reserves, in no-take areas set aside without fishing, oil drilling, mining, any other extractive activities, to save them before it's too late. And in the last 12 years, we've been able to go to 30 of these places. And we got 22 of them protected, fully protected, 22 big marine reserves, big national parks in the ocean, covering a total area over half the size of the United States. And we continue.
That's fantastic. I've got lots of questions for you, but let's move on to Andrew quickly about your journey, Andrew.
Well, I've gone full circle. I started out here in Jersey, born here in this little island, and became greatly inspired by Gerald Durrell, who was a naturalist, who was the first guy to create a zoo that was dedicated to breeding critically endangered species in the wild. And he put it on this little island. So I had this incredible opportunity to walk in there and touch the fingers of the baby orangutans through the bars, you were allowed to in those days, and walk the cheetahs around the car park. And that was a pretty good way of getting inspired by nature. And I spent much of my life actually traveling around the world at the conservation front line, exploring places that today no longer exist. That's the tragedy of it. Much of my life has been working to save tropical forests. And also, I've been less involved, but, the tropical forests of the sea, of course, are the coral reefs. And a lot of the times my journeys have taken me, such as across the Pacific and around the parts of around Madagascar and all through the Indonesian islands. And what you see in our lifetime when you're old and with a grizzly beard like mine, I have to say that's a lockdown beard. I don't usually have a beard. But you see this car crash that's happening in nature around us. And as Enric said, so many people are kind of documenting it in every way possible, but doing nothing to stop the car crash. And so after a lifetime of thinking about this in many parts of the world, I came to the conclusion that it's all about the money. And so I've decided to concentrate in the last 10 years, really, looking at how we can change the movement of money around the world. Because if we don't do that, we'll continue to finance ourselves into extinction. And when we talk about money, I'm talking about your pension fund and your bank and what both of these things are doing with your money. We put our money in the bank and we don't think about it. We put the paycheck in every month, take some out every month. You put it in a pension fund and don't think about it until 60 years later. Well, these are the big pools of capital around the world, and a lot of that money is not necessarily doing the right thing. So what we need to do is become much more aware of that and to figure out how we can change the movement of money. And that's a pretty interesting subject. And today we can talk about that in terms of the ocean.
Thanks, Andrew. And on to you, Martine.
I'm already inspired by Enric and Andrew, so my story is going to sound small. I've always been in hospitality, and when I moved to the Maldives, I had a great boss who told me, if you're going to do island living, it's important to pick up a hobby. And so I was always attracted to the ocean, and I started diving and seeing the underwater world and realizing how few people knew the impact we were having on our environment, made me decide that if there was anything we could contribute in hospitality, then it maybe was making certain that the environment we're in is protected, and that grew from getting one marine biologist on the team to a partnership with the first NGO, and then the second, and now a third, and it just it's inspiring to work with like-minded people who are passionate about conserving the ocean. We of course have the good fortune of having a fairly captive audience, because the Maldives is one island, one resort. So the guests are at the resort and stay at the resort. And we like to offer them various touch points throughout the day and the evening where they can learn of the work that the NGOs do, the importance of the ocean, the projects ongoing. And I've just been fortunate to meet a lot of inspirational people like Eric and Andrew and Matt in my career that make you even more passionate to do what you want to do.
Thanks, Martine. That's great. Yeah, I agree. It is about collaborating, and I every day I get inspired by people like yourselves and Matt, etc. So that's great, and hopefully a lot of people listening today will feel the same. So, Enric, I think what I'd like to hear a little bit about, and I think lots of other people would too, I think a little bit more about, not too much, but the threats of the ocean is facing as a result of human activity, and then the role MPAs play in restoring health to our oceans and the importance of them, and then how your team are obviously, what your team have witnessed by protecting these areas.
Yeah, basically there are three main threats to the ocean. One is too much fishing. We are taking fish out of the ocean faster than they can reproduce, and that's not sustainable. You don't need to be an economist to understand that. Two, pollution. And right now, the most conspicuous is plastic. We just saw a story last week that there are twice more microplastics in the ocean than we thought. We have turned the ocean into a plastic soup, but also we have many other pollutants that people cannot see that have been affecting the ocean life, and ultimately ours, because people eat seafood that is contaminated. And three, global heating, which is also called global warming or climate change, which is turning the ocean warmer and more acidic, which is killing coral reefs and other ecosystems around the world. See, these are the three main things. And the problem is that, as Andrew said, it's all about the money, right? And people think about the blue economy and sustainable blue economy. That's an euphemism for, oh, wow, there is untapped profits here. Investors and corporate titans are salivating with the new profits they can make out of the ocean. The problem is that the extractive industries are the ones that have more capital and more political influence, and they see the ocean as the place to extract one commodity. In the case of the fishing industry, is what they call seafood, which is more than 500 species of animals. And by monopolizing the ocean, by assuming that the only use of the ocean is to take fish out of it, that prevents ocean life from providing all the other benefits that humanity benefits from, right? And this is why assuming that we can manage the ocean sustainably and get more fish for a growing population, it's a complete illusion. It's a question of physics. Global fishing catch has been declining since the mid-90s, and despite an increased effort. So you tell me how with more effort we're going to get more fish. It is completely ludicrous. But there is a solution that works, which you mentioned, is marine protected areas. These are places where we give the ocean space. And may I share, I have 2 slides, 2 photos. May I share them?
Absolutely, go ahead. If
you allow me to share the screen. Because most people have not seen what the marine protected area can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I have been to so many places that are, the host disable attendee screen sharing. I'm not able to, sorry. So basically there are many types of protected areas, but the most effective protected areas are areas that don't allow any fishing, oil drilling, mining, or any other extractive activities. And in these areas, marine life comes back spectacularly. And I have seen miracles happen all around the world. And I cannot share. It's okay.
I'm just gonna make you the host quickly so you can share the screen.
Okay, because I love to show this before and after.
Okay, here we go. Just if you just accept this.
Okay, thank you.
Now you can share.
Thank you so much, Matt. So yeah, I'd like to show this example. This is a place called Cabo Pulmo in Baja California in Mexico. In the mid-90s, it was an underwater desert, and the local fishermen were so upset with not having enough fish to catch that instead of doing what everybody would do, which is go after the last few fish left, they asked the Mexican government to create a national park, an area without any fishing. As you can see, there was not much there. We came back 10 years later, and this is what we saw. The place, before and after, it's the same place. We saw it come back to pristine, including the return of the large fish like the groupers and the jacks. And not only the fish came back, but those visionary fishermen are now thriving because they make far more money from diving tourism and better fishing around the reserve. So these marine protected areas are good for the environment, but they are also good for the people fishing fish around them. And they are also good for creating new jobs and bringing much more economic revenue than over-exploitation. So there is no future to fisheries. There is no future to a sustainable, profitable blue ocean, blue economy without areas set aside where we let the ocean recover and give us much more than what we're doing now.
Absolutely. Thanks, Enric. Andrew, I thought that would naturally quite nicely lead on to some of your points about, the movement of money and the importance of that, because I know that, I mean, we've spoken length about it, but I know a lot of people listening will enjoy what you've got to say.
Yeah, well, in the end, all overfishing, as you say, is massive, and anything between 14 to 33%, I think, of the catch globally can be classified as illegal or unreported or unregulated fishing. I mean, it's absolutely massive, and if you turn that into, it's billions of dollars, and sort of 95% of the fishing is probably done by 5% of the fishing boats, if you know what I mean. They're giant trawlers, and all the little guys get left out, and these countries can come in and raid the coastlines under cover of darkness and seize the fish in protected areas or areas that should be fished by local fishermen, and they get out, and then they go around the world with these huge bellies full of fish and land them in places where they can illegally sell the catch. And they can't do it without money. And there's a lot of illegal money laundering associated with this kind of a business. So when you get into it, it's quite interesting to see, well, how do you unpick all this chain? And this is just the illegal side of it, such as when they often launder the money by recycling the money back into improving their ships. So they might go to shipyards that are in on the deal to get new engines or new gear or that kind of stuff. There's a sort of cycle like that. But when I was just doing a bit of research on this, I think one of the things that really surprised me is the extent to which just two jurisdictions account for 70% of the boats that are involved in illegal fishing. And they are both classified as offshore jurisdictions, as Panama and Belize. And a huge number of the ships that are registered as being involved, not registered, but known to be involved in this, are registered in those two countries. So it's pretty easy, actually, to get at them if you want to. It's just that, how do you do that? And so the money that's cycling around in that system is really big. Actually, if you look at environmental crime generally in the world, there was a World Wildlife Fund report that came out last year, which Refinitiv published, which is a big data provider to the money guys. And they reckoned it was between 20 and 23 billion a year. And that was trade in particular species. In the ocean's case, that might be sharks or rays. On land, it could be, tigers or pangolins going into China. 100,000 pangolins a year being traded into Asia. It's absolutely vast. But then if you add the destruction of the oceans and illegal fishing and also illegal logging, it gets up to about 250 billion a year. And then that was a Europol report. And then World Bank said, look, if you look at the ecosystem services that are being lost, the value of that, because if you take away a rainforest, it cools the land surface, it creates a massive amount of rain, it has huge amounts of biodiversity that provide benefits for local people, and the oceans are the same. They're drawing down carbon out of the atmosphere, cooling the atmosphere, all sorts of things are going on. If you take that brings you up to $1 to $2 trillion a year in losses. So the world has been living on a sort of $1 trillion free lunch on the planet, and we've eaten that lunch, and it's coming back to haunt us now. And we see that through the appalling plastics in the oceans, the most of which you cannot see. What most people think of are plastic bags being perhaps eaten by a turtle or something like that. That's the image in your mind. But 2/3 of ocean plastics, microplastics are the big thing, little tiny fibers. And Enric will correct me if I'm wrong, but there was an interesting report that came out that said 2/3 of those microfibers are caused by just two things, which is clothing and car tires. You wouldn't think of those things as being a real problem for the ocean, but the little microfibers, when you take off your pullover and you put it in the washing machine, they come out in the wash, they go down in the wastewater. And all the cars around the world that are driving on roads and the rain comes, what happens to a car tire when it runs out? Most of the car tires are made out of plastic, not rubber or a mix. Those fibers, again, get washed and end up in the oceans. So to tie it back to my particular narrative, we have to ask questions about the financing of those industries that are doing bad things for nature. And we need to be able to identify who's doing the right thing, who's doing the wrong thing. And if we can do that, then we can incentivize flows in other directions. So it's crazy that we have car tires that degrade and pollute the ocean with microfibers. We have to do better than that. And the same with clothing. And a lot of these things are easy fixes. Years ago, they took the filters out of washing machines. They can put them back, and smart filters and so on. So we need to start putting pressure where businesses feel it, which is money supply. And that begins with the big pension funds that are investing huge amounts of money around the world, and also bank lending. These guys are not all criminals. These guys who are just running your money, trying to give you a good pension when you come out age 60. But what they don't have is any kind of mandate on them to make sure that your pension is not only good for people, but also good for planet. And that's something new that's going to come out in the next few years. People are going to start putting pressure on, saying, we have to have a pension that's good for planet and good for people, good for you as a person. You need the money, of course, when you're too old to work. But what's the point of coming out into a world that's dead with loads of money in the bank from your pension? That doesn't make sense.
Thanks, Andrew. I think actually just going back on what you were touching, you touched upon profitability of fishing. And Enric, I watched a talk quite a while ago about how technology really helped you and your team map this. And I think that shocked me. It really did shock me about, like the opportunity that not only technology gave you and your team, but then what the profitability, where it was and where it really wasn't. I think maybe you could touch just a little bit on that. People can always find out a little bit more information about it, but it's very relevant.
Yeah, no, fishing is the last hunting operation on the planet. It's not harvesting, because we don't place any seeds in the ocean. It's hunting. It's large-scale hunting. And, until very recently, we didn't know who was fishing where. But now with the advent of satellite technology that is easily accessible and affordable, now we know from every fishing boat should carry a satellite transponder for safety issues, right? The insurance companies want to know if the boat is, has sunk or is still operating. The owners of the boats want to know where the boat is for safety, right? But not all fishing boats have it. But despite all the tricks, we do know now where most of the fishing is happening. And using the satellite technology, for the first time, we've been able to detect patterns of illegal fishing. But also, a couple of years ago, we did a global study looking at fishing boats that operate in the high seas, in the waters beyond national jurisdiction. And yes, we were able to figure out that half of the fishing in the high seas is not profitable, would not be profitable without huge government subsidies and forced labor, which is, modern slavery. So technology, these eyes on the sky, groups like Global Fishing Watch or Vulcan, now they are allowing us to see who's fishing where, and adding this transparency is revealing some criminal patterns, illegal fishing, violation of human rights, encroaching into other countries' waters, especially in developing countries. So this transparency is going to allow us to develop much better fisheries management, also more equitable fisheries all around the world.
Great, thank you. And going back to equitable fishing management, Martine, I think that leads really nicely onto what you guys are doing at Six Senses, maybe on a smaller scale, but absolutely still very important, because it does very much start from the foundation. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your how you encourage fishermen in the local islands and what's being done with your program there.
Sure. So we have the team of marine biologists is keen on getting Lamu, the whole atoll, a marine protected area. And we ran into little challenges. For every one step forward, there often are two steps back. So not giving up is key in what we do. And so we decided to break it down into really small little steps. I think that there's a famous saying that says, if you don't think one person can make a difference, sleep a night with a mosquito, and you can see the difference they can make. And so we recently, in part, thanks to Blue Marine Foundation, they came up with the idea of doing sustainable fisheries in the Lamu Atoll. So we have a group of 15 local fishermen that we have repeatedly over time met with and built a relationship with. And initially it started a little bit with, if you can agree not to fish in these areas, we will buy all your fish, because there's always fish needed for staff. So even if it isn't necessarily, you know, a large fish that you would sell to a guest, you could always use it. There's a fish curry in our staff restaurant every single day. And little bits of pieces of, you know, let's not fish there, let's not fish for these types, let's not, you know, go after groupers, let's not do. It became, we got a momentum, and with that momentum, we now have launched Six Senses Lamu fishermen. So there's a pool of fishermen that fish for the resort. We will buy all of our fish from these fishermen. We pay fair market value, the same as what we would pay if we bought it in Lamu. So it's bought it in Malé. So it's a premium for the fishermen in Lamu. And when they come and bring us their fish, if they do certain things, they get points or rewards. So, you know, if they attend a community meeting, they're rewarded with points. Or if they flag to us when there are marine mammals entangled in nets, or turtles, and with those points, they can then get, you know, raincoats and ice buckets and, you know, the satellite little trackers for their boats. And it's been really great. And it is, you know, the ideas and initiatives of the team where people feed on one another. And it's just turning into a really great initiative that we hope can then be upskilled and give other resorts in Maldives the idea to do the same thing. We had, in 2019, we started a Protect Maldives Seagrass campaign. The seagrass in the Maldives is plucked because the perception is that no guest would want to see seagrass, and yet seagrass is a really important habitat. And we started protecting oars, and we started filming, you know, seahorses, turtles, rays living in it, and we started reaching out to other marine biologists in the Maldives and other resorts, and did a survey, and it was little by little, you know, one resort became two became four became six, and now 25% of all resorts in the Maldives protect their seagrass. And we're hoping that the same can happen with, you know, the sustainable fisheries.
That's fantastic, Martine. I think there's a lot of people listening that, you know, are looking for the programs and initiatives to launch with, whilst also working to ask those questions, Andrew, like where's your pension fund investing in, etc. There's a really good question here that I just wanted to highlight. I think is from Sam Blompier. She's a marine biologist over here in Jersey, and she's looking at marine protected areas for her PhD. And she said that she couldn't agree more about the importance of protected marine areas, but the political will to designate these is lacking, even with numerous studies singing the praises of HPMAAs. And she agrees that the more we can put into financial terms, the more interest it will attract. So, Andrew, how do we go? Obviously, we've got the studies, we've got the evidence, but we're still struggling in some jurisdictions, especially here in Jersey. So, how might we best move forward with that, and what does that look like and sound like?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question that somebody's posed to me the other day. Why is it when you have all the evidence in front of you, people still don't act, or governments don't act? I mean, if you look at climate change, you know, 95% of scientists all agree, and the evidence is out there, but there's still always naysayers. And often governments can't seem to work fast enough. And I'm sure this is very true for marine protected areas. And Enric will have much more to say about this, I'm sure, than me, and or experience of it. But one of the things I find is that it's partly to do with the political mandate of the governments, who are having to make the decisions to take the actions and impose them on the population. If you take climate change, for instance, often people say we should have carbon taxes and things like that. But when you impose a carbon tax on the public, you often find everybody comes out and riots. And that's why you got the Gilets jaunes came out in France last year and went on and on and on, because they were imposing what the people regarded as unfair taxes, so that people in cities who didn't need cars weren't affected by a hike in petrol prices, which affects people in the countryside much more than people in cities. And so the people in the countryside said, no, I got to take my daughter to school. You know, I've got to go long distances. So of course, there were many reasons why the Gilets jaunes came out, but the same thing happened in Britain some years ago. So it's often difficult for countries. The real problem is democracy is really bad at dealing with climate change, I'm sorry to say, because the public simply won't accept the medicine that's required in order to meet the endpoint. And governments can't get ahead of their populations in democracies, or they get voted out of office. So that's a sort of systemic problem you have. If you, in China, for instance, they don't have a democracy. They can have a command and control culture. So they can say, you will do this. And they have moved incredibly quickly in dealing with some of these issues in a way that democracies have not been able to. So that's a really difficult thing at the heart of it. But I would ask Enric to perhaps provide some experiences when you actually physically try and get a marine protected area, and when you're trying to do it, Enric, at a global scale, but at a local scale, it can get really tricky too.
Yeah, I could spend a long time talking about why misinformation by extractive industries and polluting industries in a democracy prevents the change that would benefit the majority of the population. But let's focus on marine protected areas. And usually, there are several reasons. There are three main reasons. One is lack of awareness. Usually local fishermen say, wow, they want to, this is our sea. We've been fishing here for generations, and they want to stop, have us stop fishing, right? Second one is that the governance is not right. So usually a marine protected area, in very few countries, it can be created legally by local communities and enforced by local communities. It always depends on a fisheries or environment agency, and it requires an enforcement agency. The locals cannot enforce their own protected area. And third is the business model has been wrong, because usually marine protected areas are considered a sink of resources, right? Oh, how much is it going to cost, right? And what's the opportunity cost? So we do know that these protected areas, if placed in the right places, are going to benefit the fishermen. And in some places, within 3 to 5 years, the fishermen are already accruing net benefits, again, compared to the unprotected counterfactual. The problem is that humans are very good at discounting the future. So, well, 3 years, but what am I going to do during the next 3 years? But we're talking about closing only a fraction of the fishing grounds for a community, right? Only a fraction. And in places where they have had research for a long time, they are very happy with them. And in many cases, they ask for expansion of these reserves. So the problem is that the business model is key, because when you open a restaurant, you don't expect to have a net profit on day one, right? People invest in a restaurant or a hotel. But we conservationists are asked to show that nobody is going to lose any money from day one, right? And so this is a completely different mentality. So a key thing to make this new business of protected areas that we know benefit local communities through tourism and better fishing is for governments or NGOs to help with transition funds, to make sure that there are no losses that there are no opportunity costs during that transition period until the protected areas deliver the benefits that we all expect. But yeah, it's very difficult. There is a lot of humans are very good at preventing change, even if we know that the current situation is bad and it's just getting worse. But trying something that could benefit us, we have problems with that.
Yeah, a quick point I'd like to make there to back up what Enric is saying, this sort of discounting the future. And people say, oh, we don't want to lose any money over the next 5 years whilst we wait for this national park to come back and give us all this money you say is going to come. And I often say to them, but you're already losing a huge amount of money. You just can't see it. because you don't see it in the lost nursery grounds of the fishes, because you just trashed all the mangroves down the coast there to turn it into a shrimp farm, and you don't see the losses, because what happens today is that they're called externalities, and these are gigantic around the world. We don't pay the true cost of things when we go in a shop and buy it. So if you go and buy a piece of farmed salmon, maybe or some shrimps that have come from the other side of the world, that have been, the cost of destroying the mangroves to make those shrimps is not in the price of the shrimps. And all those little baby fish that used to grow there, and the land animals too, they're gone. But those losses are not eating into the profits of the company that's making the shrimp. So when we go into the supermarket and pick up a nice big packet of frozen shrimps or fresh shrimps that have come from the other side of the world, we say, wow, those aren't too expensive. I think I'll have some of them. But there's a whole lot of cost there that's been actually visited on the public and other fishermen around the coast. And more than that, often these fish farms are fed on anchovies and stuff like that. So being fish from someone else turned into fish meal, gone on a spot market. Nobody knows where those things came from and the cost of that. And are pumped into the shrimp farm on the other side of the world. So we in the world tend not to pay the true cost of things, which makes doing the right thing seem expensive, whereas doing the wrong thing looks cheap. And this is where our economy has got it wrong. And if we start to reprice those things through taxes, we talked about subsidies a minute ago. Did you know that the amount of harmful subsidies going into nature are 5 times more than the good money going into nature? So even if we doubled all the money going into protected areas and all that, unless we fix the subsidies that are subsidizing fossil fuels or agriculture or the fishing industry, we will not be able to win very easily. So we have to start dealing with these issues right at those bottlenecks.
Thanks, Andrew. I think, but so moving forward, especially as we kind of, I suppose, enter this new normal, if you like, and we move forward out of COVID, how can we, as large-scale businesses, I think, best address this and moving forward? Because it's, whilst we can absolutely put this true cost on products and services, how best can we, what's maybe one piece of advice for people moving forward out of this cloud to address this?
Well, I wanted just to hear more from Martine, because what really matters are the steps on the ground.
Yes.
They look small and the mountain seems too high to climb, but every step that happens on the ground is so important. And working in an individual geography, in an individual resort, every fisherman who you convert to this new way of thinking, and you multiply that up around the world, it becomes unstoppable. And you have to do the thing, all the stuff on the ground. We need to do it ourselves when you walk in the shops, to think about what we're buying and eating and ask questions about it. When we put our money in the bank, start asking questions. They won't know how to answer them today, but they will tomorrow. But so I've heard enough from me. I'd like to hear more about what Martine has been doing on the ground.
I agree. I agree with everything you're saying, and I can recognize everything that Enric is saying in how we experience it on the ground. Because a lot of our time is spent educating, or a lot of our time is spent getting engagement, getting people to buy into. When you go talk to a fisherman and they say that a marine protected area isn't good, you argue with them. Whereas if you interview a fisherman and say, how does your fish catch today compare to the way it was 3 years ago, the way it was 5 years ago, the way your father fished, the way your grandfather fished, all of a sudden, when we started having those grassroots interviews on site, it became apparent the fishermen themselves came to realize that indeed their catch was diminishing. And so at that point in time, the team spent a lot of time educating what a marine protected area is, what the benefit is of a marine protected area, why we want to go to a marine protected area. And even there, for every one step forward, you take 2 back, because, we had, I think, interviewed 150 fishermen and had sort of a consensus among the fishermen that there are benefits to protecting the area. And then all of a sudden the story started that since the Maldives is protecting sharks and the shark population has increased, it's the sharks that are responsible for, killing the fish and eating the fish, and we should be killing the shark because then there would be more fish. And so it's a constant cycle of educating, of getting buy-in, of getting people to be engaged with what you're trying to do. And I think that those grassroots efforts are really rewarding, because you build relationships, you build understanding. And while I'm not, we are not a marine protected area, I think we have our own little area that's protected, and there isn't any fishing, and the diving is fantastic. But we'd like to, we're enthusiastic about making it a marine protected area, and we're not gonna let the 2 steps back stop us from taking 10 steps forward and engaging. We do education at schools. We talk to the fishermen, their kids, their parents, school kids, and I'm blessed to have the best team at the resort working. We've always had amazing marine biologists, amazing inspirational people. We invite the likes of Matt and Alex Muster to come and tell their story to our guest, and I think buy-in and education is key to our success.
Thanks, Martine. Just looking at time now, we've had quite a few questions. So Enric, I'm aware that you've got to hop off in 10 minutes as well. So I think I might just have a look at some of these. There's one from Jane, and this is a subject coming up quite a lot as well at the moment, specifically here in Jersey. And I know this is something that Blue Marine Foundation are addressing as well. But over here, and especially during COVID, we've had a lot of French boats, and there's lots of fishing wars going on with France, with them entering some of our waters with trawlers, etc. And I know that there's been a lot of talk around how we best move forward, because unfortunately with Jersey's jurisdiction and being on France's doorstep, there's a lot of complications there. And Enric, I'm sure you've probably found that with having to talk to 2 governments instead of just the one. So she's asking maybe how we best move forward and reclaim our waters, so that our breeding grounds aren't ruined, and so that the local fishermen here can still supply locally and have an income for the foreseeable future, really.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar with the situation in Jersey, but yeah, when you have fishermen from other places fishing your waters, that doesn't help. A great example is what happens in West Africa, where we have distant water fleets from the European Union, including Spain, where I'm from, and China, basically fishing as much as they want, overcatching quotas, fishing a lot illegally, thanks to bribing corrupt officials in the local countries. And that, of course, all that fish is then sold in richer countries, which compromises food security for the local people. So that's a big issue. Now, there is also a myth that local fishermen are always sustainable, and that's not what we see everywhere around the world. There are very few fishing communities that are actually sustainable, because it does not matter how well you manage your fishing. The ocean is like a bank account where everybody withdraws, but nobody makes a deposit. If you keep eating away from that principle, you don't need to be an economist to know what's going to happen, right? So even local fishermen who have access rights, all exclusive access rights to their waters, they need more than just hoping that their fishing is going to be sustainable. They need some assurance. And these pension funds that Andrew was talking about, these are the marine protected areas where there is no fishing. These are investment accounts that we set aside with a principal that we don't touch. And we have seen that inside these protected areas where there is no fishing, the abundance of fish increases on average over 600%, compound interest, and they produce returns. So the larger your principal, the larger your returns. So if local fishermen if they saw what protected areas well managed by local communities have done in other parts of the world, every coastal village in the world would want to have their own, because they don't have to do anything. They just set it aside, and nature just does it for itself and provides all these returns. So that's what I would say, that if you can figure out your issue with the French fishermen, which I've seen in the news that they are not being too nice, but these protected areas covering key fractions of the coast around Jersey would go a long way to help with the sustainability of local fisheries.
Andrew, I think you're...
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on the law between Jersey and France, but since I'm in Jersey, I guess I should comment on that. And that the Jersey Fishing Agreement is actually bound up in a national fishing agreement between Britain and France, and that makes the unpicking of a little piece of it, which related to the Channel Islands, really difficult, is what I used to understand. I don't know if that's still the case, but in other words, the French have every right, I think, to come and fish in our waters because of a national agreement with the UK, even though the Jersey and the Channel Islands are not legally part of the United Kingdom. But we have to, I guess we're bound up in that agreement. I think that was the Granville Agreement, as it's called. So, but what we're having is French fishing boats coming in and doing a lot of fishing for scallops on the seabed with dredges that go bumping along the bottom, and this is just at the time when the bream are all laying their eggs in the surface of the sand there. So so the bream fishermen are losing out, but the scallop fishermen are winning, and so it's really hard doing that. And we're now in this situation with Brexit where all these fishing agreements are going to be rewritten. So it's a great opportunity actually for the Jersey Agreement to be carved out as a separate piece, but I'm not the legal expert on that. I don't want to put my foot in it for not knowing everything, but I think that's the situation that we're facing in the island. And the French guys are just trying to make a buck, of course, but it's not just, as Enric has said, it's a bank account. You get the boats out there. The more you go, the more you get, and then everybody wakes up later and finds out, whoops, there's nothing left. And then the whole thing crashes. Whereas with better management, you get this abundance that can be sustained. And as Enric has said, it's kind of counterintuitive. If you leave something alone for a few years, they'll end up making more money. And they find that very hard to believe, particularly fishermen. But it's been proven time and time again. But it takes some time to get that message out there and have proven cases, which people will begin to take seriously.
I think, hi guys, it's been really interesting listening in, and I think there's something there. We keep talking about the fishermen, but in these places, you're protecting your coastal area, but it's not just the fishermen that are going to, in the long run, they're going to do well out of this, but it's also the tourism industry. That's the biggest thing. It's sustainable travel. It's the tourist industry that's going to have this abundance of fish coming back. And I think a lot of the time that's something that's a long-term measure on this, isn't it? And that's something that you see. You clearly see it in the Maldives. But another country I went to recently was Oman, and they've been protecting their waters for some time, and I found that really interesting, and seeing the abundance of fish there and how the fishermen are actually looked after by the government in Oman, so it's a little bit different. But it was really interesting for me to see how the Maldives and the Omani government are looking after the people.
Yeah, absolutely. So just cautious of time because we've got our next webinar at 3:00. I just thought we might like to close with some remarks in regards to maybe Enric, you could talk a little bit about 30 by 30 and just what your work involves over the next year or so, and programs and initiatives that you're involved in, and how other people can learn from you.
So today 7% of the ocean, global ocean, is in areas that have been designated or proposed as protected. 7%. But the science is telling us that we need more than 30%. And that protecting the right 30% of the ocean would not only preserve key marine life that gives us lots of benefits that we can enjoy, but also it would help boost global fisheries catch around the world. We will be catching more fish without doing anything else but protecting these key places. And also that would help the ocean store more carbon, more of our carbon pollution that we expelled into the atmosphere. So we have a triple win. we would protect marine life that is essential to our survival, we would increase food security globally, and also would help mitigate climate change. And I am hopeful because there are countries that have already done it. Palau, 80% of their waters. Seychelles, 30% of their waters. Chile, 42% of their waters, and so on and so forth. So we have a long way to go. We have to quadruple the area of the ocean protected to get to that 30% by 2030. But there are countries that are leading the way. The UK has protected more than 30% of their waters, mostly in the overseas territories. There's a lot of work that the UK needs to do in home waters. But there are countries leading the way, and we just need the political will and the rational and smart thinking by politicians.
Thank you, Enric. Thanks so much. Andrew?
Yeah, I thought I'd just end on a hopeful note to think of how things can change. I mean, look, I was talking about mangroves and aquaculture. Well, several things have happened in the last few years, particularly since we had some big coastal tsunamis, and people have realized that the countries that kept their mangroves did a lot better than those that got rid of them. And so there's now a new value being placed on sort of mangroves, and people finance models to put the mangroves back because it's actually cheaper to put in the mangroves and let them grow than build a great big seawall. And also new kinds of foods. Demand for these kinds of foods is going to continue because population is going up. But so how do we produce fish food better? Well, stop feeding them anchovies and start feeding them insects. Here's another really interesting thing that people are looking at. Now, in the case of Sumatra, there's some people I've been working with there who you get the palm oil industry that produces another problem with the palm oil industry. Don't get me on that one, but we'll think of the marine side. There's huge amounts of old fruit bunches left over when the palm oil has been squeezed. And there's a little fly called the black soldier fly that likes nothing better than its maggots eat up all those fruit bunches. Well, if you can industrialize that process, and the people are looking at that, then the maggots can be dried, turned into a fish food, and you can feed the fish on that instead of having overfishing of anchovies somewhere else as far away as Chile. And you can have a localized supply using a localized supply of waste, producing a new kind of protein source. And it's these kinds of innovative new things that people are to look at, and the money is going into that sort of thing to help us get out of some of these problems.
Amen to all of that, Andrew, completely. Thank you so much. And Martine, any closing thoughts?
No, other than, it's these it's Andrew, it's Eric, it's Matt, yourself. It's these kind of discussions that just continue to inspire. I think we all need to make certain that we remain open-minded, look at, learn, inspire each other, and don't give up.
Absolutely. And I think I'd just like to elaborate on that. That's exactly what we're trying to do as a community, is do exactly this and continue this conversation, not just have it on World Oceans Day, but to continue these conversations, listen to our participants. If any of you have got, I'm weary that we didn't get through all the questions, so please feel free to send us an email and we'll get back to you individually and connect you with Martine and Andrew and Enric, etc. And I just like to say thank you both. And Enric had to leave; he's on another webinar now. Thank you all so much for your time today. It really is. It's a fantastic thing that you've done today and continue to do in your daily roles. So thank you.
Yeah, I want to say thank you so much. It's been really great to sit back and listen to this. I've copied some more questions that I'll send over to you guys. But as Tamsin says, it's nice just to be able to just connect great minds and to have these open conversations. And as myself as a storyteller, I like to hear the journey and hear the stories and be able to share that knowledge that you have. So thank you so much, Martine, Andrew, and Enric. He had to leave early, but yeah,